Hi, guys. Welcome back to another week, another episode of Unlicensed. If this is your first time tuning in, my name is Jill. I'm the host of Unlicensed. And this is the advice podcast where women write in anonymously about anything that's on their heart and minds. And I bring in my different female guests each week to help me offer advice on these topics, including relationship coaches, therapists, friends, family, and social media influencers. I am so excited for today's episode. We are joined by clinical therapist Melissa Adeniyi, who helps individuals with a variety of different issues such as anxiety, depression, addiction, relationship issues, couples therapy. She is dedicated to helping individuals and couples navigate life's challenges and discover their fullest potential. Welcome, Melissa. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. What an intro.
Oh my
Thank
gosh,
you.
we love it. Okay, and I wanted to ask you this because we got cut from the thing. So you said you just got married. Before we hop into it,
did.
I'm nosy. Before we get into the episode, tell me about how's the wedding? When did you get married? I want to hear about it.
Yeah,
all.
absolutely. Yeah, I got married August 9th.
Oh, super
and
recently.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
So very recent. It was so great. It was perfect. We did it at the church and just a small, well, it tended to be a small wedding, but
Yeah.
a lot of people showed up,
You're
so
right.
that's good.
This is more than we had originally. That's
But yeah, no, it
awesome.
was a great time. So I'm super happy.
Oh.
I'm very lucky.
How long were you guys dating before you got married?
So we are at 3 years now. So a little
Nice.
short of 3 years when we got married.
Perfect. That's so exciting. It's
Yeah.
like perfect time of year, I feel like, for weddings. Everyone's getting married and engaged too. Whenever I go up on like
Yeah.
my social media, I'm like, everyone's getting married. So congratulations. That's nothing to do with the episode,
Yeah,
but
thank you.
I am nosy and wanted to know. As always, guys, we usually get to know our guests, but because of time purposes today, we are gonna hop right into the episode. And I am so excited for today's episode. We are talking about addiction. We are talking about some of the genetic, biological, evolutionary factors that play a role into it. We are talking about recovery. We are talking about maybe if you're in a situation where you have a friend who you believe might be showing signs of forming an addiction and ways that you can approach that as well. So this person wrote in and they said, I have a friend I'm really worried about when it comes to their drinking. When they drink, it's like they become a completely different person. They go from being one of the kindest souls I know to being mean, rude, and even a little physically aggressive with friends. She drinks every day, not just casually or socially. It's usually multiple drinks, not just one, and it happens throughout the week, even right after class. She's my friend, so I've stuck by her, but I've also seen how many friendships she's lost because of her drinking, and I feel like I'm reaching my breaking point. A lot of the time, she can't even apologize or take accountability because she blacks out and doesn't remember what happened, and we all end up just forgiving her. Some people have tried to bring it up to her before, but she's always brushes it off, saying things like, it's college, everyone drinks like this, or my friends at bigger schools drink even more. I don't know if this is a real issue of alcoholism or addiction or if I'm just overthinking, but I'm obviously not a professional, so I don't know how to go about this. And I know it's starting to take a toll. So I'm super excited to talk about this. I think this is a topic that there's a lot of bias around. Media portrays a lot of things about this, so we'll hop into this all. But I think just to start off the episode, it's going to be really important that we just provide from a clinical lens a definition of what addiction actually is so people are aware. And some of my questions around it, we can all kind of have that same forefront moving forward. If you could offer that, that would be great. What is addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I would say there's definitely not a one size fits all for addiction. I think there's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration, like our culture and where we come from and what's normal within our culture. But basically, when it comes to therapy or psychology, what we're really looking for is this affecting my relationships? Is this affecting my education, my work? Is it affecting different areas of my life in a way that's negative or potentially can be negative in the future? And if we're wanting to change that. So the definition of addiction really is for to help find the right treatment plan for them. So again, it really just depends on the person. But overall, addiction can be an excessive amount of drinking, like binge drinking. Doesn't necessarily have to fall into the addiction realm, but it can be in the alcohol abuse realm. There's also a difference between abuse and also dependency. So it's such a hard way to just define it as one thing, but basically being addicted to something is not being able to stop, not being able to have control over that item anymore, whether it be alcohol or any other substance, even though wanting to make that change. That's kind of like one of the bigger things that let us know that it's addiction or not.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. And you covered so many things that I want to have
Yeah.
within that too. You mentioned substance use disorders and doing some research. I was reading between the differences between substance use disorders. So using drugs, for example,
Mm-hmm.
losing control of it versus like a behavioral addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the example they used was bulimia. And I found that to be very interesting because for someone who went to an all girls school, and I feel like we always were taught about eating disorders growing up, I never thought of something like bulimia being a behavioral addiction. But I guess it
Mm-hmm.
does get to the point that if you can't control it in that sense and you feel like you need to do it after every meal, it makes sense. Do you feel like women struggle more with substance use disorders or behavioral addictions? And why do you feel like that might be the case?
Yeah, the thing about addiction is that once you it doesn't discriminate. So it doesn't matter if
Mm-hmm.
you're a male or female or you're rich or you're poor. It doesn't matter where you're from. Once it gets you, that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really hard to say that if it's more of a behavioral or addiction piece. But I think that there's definitely pieces within our media and the way that women are pressured to doing different things or being certain ways that we do change our behaviors in that way. But it's hard to say between addiction and behavior what would be the difference between that, because again, it just doesn't discriminate.
Right. I
Yeah.
love that you brought that up. I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Obviously, addiction affects all races, cultures, socioeconomic groups, genders. And I feel like sometimes the media portrays addiction very negatively within what I typically see people of color, low socioeconomic
Mm.
classes. Obviously, we know in real life that's not the case. I'm really interested if you could elaborate more on how you feel like media has negatively influenced what some of people believe addiction affects only certain groups of people, and among that too, because it is very dangerous. And I know I've seen that since being a kid, just watching like Law and Order SVU and all of these
Yeah.
different shows that I probably shouldn't be watching at 6 years old. I would love to hear your opinions on how media really affects that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely portrayed as something that's more um low economic status type of issue, but that is not the case. I think if anything, um people who have more means to get to these things or these drugs or these addictions, um it's just a little bit more private. They can't afford to go to a private place
Mm,
and get the treatment that they need and to keep it on the hush hush. Or I mean, there's a lot of people in leadership. Being in leadership is really, really difficult, and you can fall into addiction that way.
yeah.
But it's just a little bit easier to hide behind our success and behind our money and to say, like, well, I am a leader or I'm a, like they say, functioning alcoholic. Get away with it because we have a different status versus somebody who is struggling economically, struggling to find a job, and also struggling with addiction. On top of
Mm,
that, it's seen more as, well, you're not doing anything,
yeah.
so it's harder to hide behind the addiction versus somebody who has a higher status in our
I
society.
love that you brought up the higher status because it made me immediately think of someone who might be a high functioning addict. You can't tell from the outside, especially if it's not someone that has a serious substance use disorder, for example, that they might be struggling. They might have a
Mhm.
great job, they might be in a loving marriage. From the outside, and it just looks like they have their shit together, but in reality, they might really be struggling. How can you tell? What are some signs of someone who's high functioning that they might be forming an addiction? Does it really just come down to them having to be open and vulnerable about that's something that they're dealing with? Because I feel like we've always known a person who seems to have it all together, seems to be someone from the outside looking in that you think would never be someone that would have an addiction. And then later on, they're like, actually, I was really struggling with alcohol for years, or I had a really bad drug problem, or I have bulimia. So, what are some signs that people can look out for someone who's in a high functioning role, if
That's a
there are
great,
any?
yeah, no, that's a great question. And sometimes the signs can be really subtle. But again,
Mm,
it kind of goes back to the lines that are blurred between addiction and dependency. Sometimes just to feel normal, to be able to get to work and do the normal things, they need to have X amount of drinks or whatever substance
yeah.
just to get there. And there's a problem there, but there's also a dependence just to show up and to be present. So the baseline kind of keeps going back and back and back. So then it's kind of hard to tell because they seem to be doing normal, but really they're normal because they're using substances to get them to that
Mm,
place
yeah.
because they've used it for so long. But just some signs that we may see is uh, addiction can be very isolating. So our friends not no longer showing up, not coming out as often, canceling plans,
Mm,
just not being present, kind of closing themselves off and doing it more private. That's a sign that we can see that somebody might be struggling in private and also high functioning because they're still keeping their
interesting.
status.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that come down to them just not wanting people to know what's going on with them in a lot of those cases? Or that thing is taking so much over their life that friendships and that social support doesn't matter as much anymore.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a
You're so
really
validating to me. I love this.
yeah.
I'm like, thank
Those are really great questions.
you.
Yeah, it's that's one of the things that I hear often in therapy is feeling that their loved ones no longer cares about them because they're choosing alcohol over them. When it's really that's not the case. It's
Mm.
almost like addiction is like a toxic relationship. So it's not that you don't love your friends anymore. It's just that you're so caught up with this toxic relationship. And if addiction was a human, I would say, just stay home with me. We have so much fun. Like
Hmm.
nobody judges you here. We could just drink and have fun and it's fine.
Yeah.
Right. When in reality, that's so toxic. That's not good. We need to hang out with friends. We need to be social.
Yes.
So that's how I would explain that is that it's kind of like a toxic relationship. It's not that you don't want your friends or anymore. It's just that this is kind of a comfort zone. It's just, it
Mm.
kind of pulls you in and it makes you stay.
Yeah. It's very much a disease in that sense. And I love that you're bringing up misconceptions because I think that's where a lot of the miseducation comes into play of this, of people just don't really know what addiction actually is.
Mhm.
I was reading how a lot of people look at addiction as a personal weakness or a moral failing, but the American Society of Addiction Medicine defines addiction as a chronic brain disorder.
Mhm.
Why do you feel like people do not see addiction as a disease, a disorder, and they just look at it as someone who that's their own personal weakness. They're not trying hard enough. They have so much like animosity really towards
Mhm.
people that are really struggling in that way. Why do you feel like people have that misconception around it?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to understand addiction if you don't have a personal connection to it. It's hard to understand how somebody could just not drink. Just don't drink. Just hang out.
Mm.
Just, kind of like saying be happy, calm down,
Yeah.
right? All those trigger words.
Triggering, yes.
But it's hard to understand what's so hard about kind of just putting the drink down. And what's so hard about choosing your family or love over other things,
Mm.
right? But I think that's why it's seen as um, it's hard to see it as a disease because it's hard to understand it, and it's also not um, something physical that you can see or touch, or it's not very tangible. It's hard to really see it. For example, if you have a broken arm, you can see that it's physical. You
Yeah.
put it on X-ray, it's right there, it's clear. It's a
Broken
broken arm,
immediately. Yeah.
100%,
Yeah.
right? But you can't go under an X-ray and say, "Oh, yep, you got the disease of
Yeah.
addiction."
That's so true.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder to kind of have proof that this is an actual disease. The same way that we
Mm.
struggle with proving depression and anxiety that these are real things that
Yeah.
happened, because you can't just go to the doctor and have evidence that this is it, right?
There's
So
still so many obviously conversations that need to be happening around mental health in general for people to understand, and obviously that's multi-generational. A lot of family dynamics play a role into that too. In
yeah.
terms of family as well, I know genetics play a huge factor in some cases into addiction. I was reading a statistic that said genetics account for roughly 50 to 60% of the risk for someone having an addiction. Can you talk to us a little more about how family background and genetics are playing a role into addictions being formed? Because I knew that genetics did play a really big role into it. I don't think I realized that it was over half or more, but it
Mhm.
makes sense in terms of if your dad had an addiction, alcoholism, grandpa, that you would also have the same gene for being more susceptible to that. But I
Mhm.
would love to hear about that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. This goes the same with like other diseases. Like if our family has a line of breast cancer, then we're most likely to have breast cancer as well. It's the same way that a disease would
Mm.
work. So if it's in our genes or our families have that, then it's something that we can have, and it doesn't mean that we're going to be addicted or be an addict. But it's more likely, and that's something we need to be careful of,
Yeah.
right? And it does play a huge part just genetically, but also in our upbringing and growing up. I mean, there's a lot of research as to why
Yeah.
this is a disease, and there's a whole thing about like the ACE assessment. I don't know if you've heard about that, but there's like a
No.
huge, a lot of studies about adverse childhood experiences
Okay.
and how that can affect your proneness to have diseases like addiction or like other things.
Mm.
And so if you come from a line of an environment that's not healthy, then it gets passed down, and then we
Yeah.
learn those behaviors and we don't cope with things appropriately, and then we use different things to cope. So it's like a mixture of nature and nurture
Yes. Yeah.
together, and it just makes a perfect storm. to become an addict.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the more information we have, the better it is for us to catch that and to not fall into that.
Yeah.
But I think it is very important to know that if it comes in our bloodline, for
Hmm.
us to be aware of that. For
You
sure.
broke that down so well. And you mentioned the nurture versus nature. And I think that's so important because I wanted to talk about environment, specifically college culture. In this prompt, I think is great. College culture is all about binge drinking, getting fucked up, excuse my language, on a Tuesday and nobody thinking anything of
Mhm.
it. I remember in college, my friends all the time, we would black out pretty regularly in terms of the weekends. And I look back on that now at 28 and it's like, that's not normal. But in college, it was normal. No one bat an eye. No one questioned you. No one felt like you needed help, even though at 21 years old, I probably shouldn't have been doing that to my brain or my body, especially with brunettes, the most disgusting vodka ever. Definitely not. So, can we talk about how college culture plays a really negative role into people not seeking help for an addiction or even denying that they need help for it in this sense just because of how we view college culture in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like our friend wrote in here about other colleges drinking more than what she drinks, I think it's very much a norm to get blackout drunk on the
Mhm.
weekends or whenever, really. Any day you off school, just go ahead
Yeah,
and do
just go,
it.
seriously.
Yeah, so culture plays a huge part in that. If you're surrounded by people that are saying, "Yeah, go ahead, this is fine, there's no problem with that,"
Yeah.
then it's kind of seems like, okay, I can do this, and we don't really think twice about it. But I would say that's kind of with everything. We could be in family dynamics, we can be in friend dynamics that it just seems like this is just what we do. This is normal. We don't question it, so we're just going to go with the flow.
Yeah.
But the moment we try to break away or try to see a different path, we see, oh, maybe that's not the best path for me. Right. And then we
Mhm.
can decide to make that change. But it is very, very difficult. And there's a lot of influence and there's a lot of huge companies that market towards these young individuals.
Oof.
And so it's kind of, we got it stacked up against young people that are going through college, that it's really hard to kind of steer a different way or even question it because it is so normal everywhere.
Everywhere. I never even thought about the marketing aspect of it, but you're so right. Every TikTok that I see promoting an alcohol, it's very related to Gen Z and like what's
Hmm.
in that way. And in a lot of cases, it's kids that aren't even legal yet that are able to get access to those things too. Obviously, when I was reading on you, you have a multicultural background, and I
Hmm.
know that you bring that lens into your work of helping people with like cross cultural issues too. How important is it to look at culture specifically when looking at addiction? Because I was reading, and you mentioned it just now as well, like sometimes having a drink and having that camaraderie, it's so normalized to the point that you might be at 15 years old having a glass of wine with your family every single night for dinner, to a point then once you're legal and older in age, you have to have a glass of wine every single night at dinner and you can't control it anymore. So how important is culture really in playing a role into it all? I think that's so great that you brought that up.
Yeah, no, that's super important to take into consideration culture,
Hmm.
because that also takes into consideration how willing that person is to change their behavior. So I'm Latina and I grew up with Latin parents, and
Yeah.
it's very normal for your uncles to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning crying over alcohol and just being drunk. That's just kind of like how things go,
Uh-huh.
and we don't question it, and that's just how it is. And I know in other countries, as you mentioned, you get a drink very early on
Hmm.
and you have a glass of wine with your family at dinner, and that's a very normal thing. And I would say this is an area that I like to tread lightly because there's the DSM, right? That
Hmm.
defines what addiction is and what that looks like. But I believe that we have to look at the cultural background and what that person is comfortable with and what changes they want to make.
Love that.
Not that I'm going to say, well, I believe it's wrong, so now you need to change
Yeah.
your entire culture dynamic. But it's more so there's this technique called motivational interviewing, which is we interview, not so much interview, but we just ask questions to
Hmm.
make people question whether or not this is something that they do love and that they're okay with, or if this is something they think they need to change. So I think that it's very important to kind of meet people where they're at and
Yeah.
determine, is this something that they want to change, or is this something that I feel uncomfortable with that I want to change in them?
I was gonna ask you about that. The best way to approach someone when you're worried about them in the sense too. And I love that you brought the culture up for that because you're right, with cultural aspects, you don't want to cross any lines that might work for this one person, but
Mhm.
not this other person based on their background in the sense. But if you are seeing a friend who's really struggling with something, How do you know how to go about approaching that? Is that just knowing your friend and approaching it one on one? Bringing in family, bringing in like a trusted person that, can really get through to them in the sense, an intervention. Like I'm thinking about college age students who might struggle with confrontation in general, especially when it's something that's way more serious than just like a friendship fight. When you're seeing a friend who's obviously battling with aspects of alcoholism, what is the best way to go about that and approach that?
Yeah, that's a tough
I know. I
question.
was like, we probably need like an hour just for that
Yeah.
alone.
No, that's a tough question. And I don't want to say a one size fits all for that
Yeah.
question because it really depends on the relationship that you have with that person, how that person has been behaving through this process. Like it
Hmm.
can be a very dangerous conversation as well, depending on the person and how they might react. I would say one thing not to do is to do not take away their substances, do not take away their alcohol or their drug or their cigarettes or whatever it is that they're using. Do
Yeah.
not take that and throw it away because that could just trigger that person immensely. And that's not the kind of relationship we want to have. Um, I would say to seek out resources individually based on people's situations. So
Mm.
going to therapy or going to a program called Al-Anon, which is friends and family of those who are struggling with addiction. And they give really good feedback from different people who've been in that same situation.
Love that.
So seeking resources in that way, some ways that it can be done is having a conversation, right?
Mhm.
One of the big things that I would say that is important to do is to set appropriate boundaries. So we have to look inwards and say, am I enabling this behavior by kind of
Mm.
co-signing and showing up and still going out partying with them, even though I don't like that,
Yep.
right? Or should I set this boundary and say, hey, I'm only going to go to breakfast with you because I don't like the way that, we interact whenever we are drinking together,
Yeah.
right? And setting that boundary, and that's one of the big problems that I see with people who are going through addiction is that they don't stop because people around them are still there. They still show up
Mm.
and they still help them financially or emotionally, and so there's no reason to stop.
Ah.
They still have everything that they need. Versus when family shows up and gives tough loves and says, hey, I'm here for you, I love you 1,000%, and when you're ready, my doors are open, but for right now I can't hang out with you.
Mm.
I'm sorry I can't hang out with you, but when you're ready, I'm here. I
Yeah.
think that's the best way that we can show love to somebody that's showing us that I don't want to be around this person at this time. It's kind of separating ourselves and setting that boundary.
That's fantastic advice. And I was going to ask you from the family end, is it just hard for them to, or friend end too, is it hard to stop enabling that behavior or set boundaries with an addict just because of loyalty in general? You love this person, you don't want to see them struggling, you don't want to cut them off, and then they might end up on the streets and in bad care. Is it just, do you feel like people typically have trouble setting boundaries with people with addictions just because they're worried that without them, they might be so much worse?
Yes, that's a big
Okay.
part of it. That's a big part of it is knowing the effects that that can have on that person. It could actually make them worse off.
Mm,
But sometimes we need people who are struggling with addiction to be worse off for them to be able to make that change,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because if we continue to give them this comfy life and all this support and kind of enabling this behavior, there's less motivation for change, right? And
Mhm.
also for oneself, I think that it's important to set that boundary before it gets to a point where the line is crossed so far that there's zero contact, which
Yeah.
I see that often where people become sober and say, hey, I did something so bad in my addiction that this person just completely cut
Yeah.
contact and now we're no longer friends or whatever.
Mhm.
So it's important to kind of set that line before it gets to that point as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest things is just being afraid of what could happen to that person. I think another thing, and I think it's hard to hear sometimes, is that people who are going through addiction can sometimes be very manipulative in getting what they need because they have to, which I say is a huge strength once they are sober, because they're very resourceful and can find ways
They
to
know
kind of
what to do to get what they
problem to
need. Yeah.
solve. Yes.
Yeah.
But I would say that that's another piece of it, that it can be very manipulative and it could be very much like, I'm going to change. I promise this is the last time. Like, I love you, all these things. And then
Mhm.
again, it's like a toxic relationship. Then it
Yeah.
happens, and then we try to repair again, and it's just a circle. Yeah.
When you mentioned like someone, forming an addiction can be highly resourceful in that
Hmm.
sense, it made me think of other traits or personality traits that you typically see being associated with someone who might be more susceptible to forming an addiction. So I think, for example, for someone who might be really impulsive, that might be more of a trait that's associated with you eventually trying things just because you're like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to do it, to the
Hmm.
point where now you're addicted to it. What other traits are you familiar with that might be associated with someone who's more susceptible to forming an addiction? It can be personality traits or just general traits, but super interested to hear if there is any link between the two.
Yeah, so there's no cut and dry, absolutely, this is what happened. But there's some things that I do think that don't help with not getting into addiction. And one thing is isolation. I think community is super important, and always having a healthy community around you. What that looks like doesn't matter. It could be church, it could be friends, it could
Mm.
be camp, it could be whatever, it could be anything. But as long
Yeah.
as you have community of people around you that can hold you accountable and have those conversations. I think another thing is understanding yourself and knowing where your weaknesses are and knowing how to regulate your own emotions, whether that's through different coping skills or different hobbies, or knowing when you start to slip, what you need to do to kind of get yourself back
That
up.
self awareness in that
Yes,
sense. Yeah.
the self-awareness is super important, and that's something that people learn while they go through recovery. It's
Hmm.
just kind of, what am I doing, what do I do that's like not healthy, and how can I get myself back to a healthier space.
Definitely. I'm glad you brought all that up because I was going to ask you about just healthy mechanisms that can be associated with someone trying to recover. I thought of self awareness. That's someone that I have so many friends, for example, that might have someone in their family that's an alcoholic and they're like, that's my father. I probably might have that too. I'm just not going to drink and get
Mhm.
aware of that, and communication. So I'm really glad that you mentioned some of like the mechanisms that can play a role into that too. I do want to talk about access because you mentioned earlier the marketing, and I thought that was
Mhm.
so interesting, especially with alcohol. And I was reading about addictions, and they were saying how the most common addiction was alcohol. That immediately made me think of accessibility. It's easy to get. You can go to
Mhm.
a Publix, which is insane, and get drunk from half the stuff that they have
Mhm.
in their cabinets. It's just everywhere at this point. How does accessibility play a role into someone forming an addiction more frequently or more often compared to things that you don't obviously have as much access to?
Yeah, I think that accessibility is a huge piece of that. Like you mentioned, you go to any store, if you're gonna get groceries, you're gonna see alcohol
Yes.
there, and that's it's just so easy to get. Even as kids, I mean, in college, there's ways to get alcohol. It's very, very easy,
Yes.
and I would say it's fairly inexpensive to get very drunk if you really need to. It might be, what was it, Burnett's.
$11. That's why we
Burnett,
did it. We're like, this is our
right?
allowance for the week from our parents. We're spending it on this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fairly inexpensive as well. So I think accessibility is huge. I
Yeah.
think another really important piece to addiction is that accessibility to hard drugs like opiates, through different things like an accident. Like if you got into a car accident or something, that's a way that a lot of people I've met through opiate addiction, that's how it kind of starts. It's like I
Mm,
had an accident, they gave me opiates and it felt really good, and then I kind of really liked it, and then I kind of used it when I didn't need it, and then it just kind of escalated and it
yeah.
goes from there. And now I have this lifelong disease, and now I'm going to use more opiates, and then I abuse it. So accessibility to those kinds of drugs as well. It's not just alcohol.
Definitely. When I think of that too with the accessibility in college, obviously it's so easy to get all of these things from your fraternity brothers and sisters, or just if you have an older sibling at the school that can get it. I got a fake my sophomore year. Like it's easy to get these things and obviously do it for
Yeah.
yourself as well. When it comes to the mean drunk in college, like personality types, and obviously mean drunk can be throughout your life, and I think in college people just refer to it as like, oh, that's just them when they're drunk and they're really sweet. But
Mhm.
obviously if you're getting really aggressive and mean when you're drinking, it's a drinking issue. Doesn't mean
Mhm.
you're an alcoholic, but you have an issue with drinking. That's a drinking
Mhm.
issue. What cognitive, neurobiological, or social elements are happening for aggression to have such an effect on people when they start drinking. I have no idea about that. I used to be like a little bit of a mean drunk in college, and I think it goes back to me just holding in a lot of things,
Mhm.
eventually more like cognitively, and then I would hold it in and then it would come out in drunk, and I'd be frustrated with people that I should have had a conversation with sober, etc. So I'm interested if you could provide some more detail for someone that might be, well, I get really mean when I'm drunk too. What's going on?
Mhm.
Obviously, there's more of an issue there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely there's something in us that we may not really know or understand, and that really comes out whenever we're drinking. So our frontal cortex is just gates are open, and we just do and say whatever's on our mind without any filter. When day
Yeah.
to day we have somewhat of a filter, most of us, most of the time, I would say. So it kind of blocks out what we're maybe truly feeling deeply on the inside. Just because we come off on anger doesn't mean that that's exactly how we feel. It's kind of like a very heightened, raw
Yeah.
way of expressing it. But if we were to process that, we would understand better what that is. So
Yeah.
it could be a lot of different things, from like upbringing to something that happened to some resentments that are being held that are causing us to kind of feel these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes sense when you're holding those things in too. On the opposite side of that, I'm thinking from the standpoint of an addict, what makes them in some scenarios deny their addiction? I'm really interested in, because obviously I think with some people it goes back to our conversation earlier in the episode. It's not just being like, oh, I just don't want to admit to that. It's so complex, I'm sure. So what are some reasons behind addicts denying that they have a problem or an issue or a substance use disorder, whatever that
Hmm.
looks like too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think um, addiction, it has a really negative stigma to it. So admitting that I have this disease that's just heartbreaking, is really, really hard to do in general. I think it kind of goes to show how fast things escalated, because a lot of times it doesn't start in one day. Sometimes it does depending on the drug,
Hmm.
but a lot of times it kind of slowly, well, I'm just gonna have one drink, well, I'm gonna have a couple of drinks, well, I've had a long day, so I'm gonna have 5 drinks, and
Hmm.
it's really not that bad. I still go to work, and we're justifying and justifying and justifying. And then once it's really, really bad, we've gotten so far, so deep into justifying, that it's just kind of, we don't really see it.
Yeah.
And I think a funny equivalent of that is like girl math, right? So it's like, well, if I buy this new bag, I'll use it every
And I
day,
have cash for it. It's like I haven't
Right.
even paid for
Right.
it.
So it's
Yeah.
free.
Yeah.
So it's like we do that enough, and then we have a closet full of bags, and it's like, oh, wait, maybe I should be doing
Yeah.
that, right?
So true.
So we can justify things so easily, and
Yeah.
it's so natural for us to justify that. Once it's an actual big problem, to say, like, oh, now I have a problem, is really hard, because we built this whole story of justifications that
Hmm.
it's hard to admit that it's actually an issue now.
No, that's so fair. It's like it is girl math. Like, and especially it goes back to like if you're high functioning in that, you really might believe that there's no issue to it as well.
Hmm.
We are almost out of time. This has been so fun, but
Yeah.
just last words of advice that you would want to have for this person. Obviously, they're really worried about their friend, but I can just tell even from this, there is an issue going on with this person with their drinking.
Hmm.
So, what advice would you like to offer to the girl who's worried about her friend? But also, maybe if the friend listens to this episode, any advice that you would love to have for them as
I
well?
think it's really important for this person to set appropriate boundaries. There's a clear issue with the way the relationship is being played out right now, and she does not like the way her friend shows up when they're drinking. So, like I mentioned before, saying something like, let's just have breakfast together. That's just going to be how our new relationship is.
Yep.
So, setting that appropriate boundary, and also seeking some help with either a therapist or a support group like Al Anon, people around her, or even friends of that friend, that can help try to find the best way to show up without pushing that person, because it's clear this person is, if they have a problem, that they are in denial.
Yeah.
So this is not the time to say, see, you have a problem, and
Yeah.
just kind of, because they're, especially since they've been aggressive in the past. So it's important to be very careful. And for this friend, I would say that I think it'd be good to also try therapy. Of course, I'm biased because
Yeah,
I'm a
you're like,
therapist.
come to me.
Go to therapy, go to therapy. But also just I think going into, there's Al-Anon meetings as well, just kind of just sitting in and listening. You're not committing to anything, or there's even online at all times of every day. There's always meetings, so just kind of listening in and just hearing the stories and seeing if you relate to
Yeah.
a little bit to what these people are saying. Just kind of like a little inching our way to seeing, is this something that I struggle with?
Yeah, start doing the research yourself to see if that's something That's amazing
Yeah.
advice. Melissa, thank you so much for being here today. I'm
Yes.
sorry we couldn't chat more, but
Yes.
please let the people know where they can find you, your practices, any of your social media that you want. Let them know because this has
Yeah.
been an awesome combo.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm not on social media
Good for
really.
you.
Maybe I should do that, right? Market myself more. But I am on Psychology Today, so you can look up Melissa Adeniyi and you can find me there. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Go look her up, guys. Hopefully, you enjoyed today's episode. I know I did. And of course, if you want to listen to more fun episodes with special guests like Melissa moving forward, you know where to find us on our unlicensed TikTok or Instagram at Unlicensed Advice. If you want anyone to answer your advice, head to that Google form through my Instagram and we will get it answered for you guys today. But I love you guys and we'll see you next week.